It's Mari McInerney from Croakey here at a Medical Radiation Sciences conference in Adelaide with one of the winners of an award by the convening body, ASMRT, the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiotherapists. Marilyn, would you be able to introduce yourself and tell us what award you won, please?
My name's Marilyn Zelesco and I've won the Board Recognition Award for 2025.
So congratulations on that. Now, it was a very interesting thing because it was kind of a secret Santa type award. They weren't going to say who'd won it, and everybody was trying to think, what would give it away. And then all of a sudden came the words International Space Station. So tell us about that work.
So many years ago, I worked with a radiographer who had done some work in Scotland, working with NASA. And the problem that NASA had and still has is it's obviously very expensive and not always even able to be achieved to fly or launch imaging equipment into space. But astronauts on the International Space Station and other spacecraft are at risk of what they call large force blunt injury. So the dilemma they had was that they were worried if an astronaut had a head injury, how would they know if that head injury was getting worse or not? So he came up with a protocol to use what we call transcranial Doppler. So it essentially is a technique where you put it on the parietal bone and it acquires signals, and that will show if there's a bleed or not in the head. So after they worked out a protocol on how to do that, they thought, well, they use ultrasound to gain research information about how the body's functioning in space, what the heart does, what other organs do. So they thought, could there be a way of utilising that equipment to help in an emergency? Because abandoning an orbit is very expensive and it obviously puts the whole journey at risk. So they asked if we could get involved in organising some ultrasound protocols, so some instructions using the equipment they had, so that any of the astronauts could scan any of the other astronauts, beam those images back to Earth so that a medical specialist could interpret if there was a problem or not. And I was involved with that.
And what was it like to be involved? Was it just routine, but you happened to be talking about outer space? And have they actually used those protocols? Have they been put into operation?
They definitely are put in operation. It was quite interesting because I never really thought about microgravity work. So myself and Rob Hart, who by then was Dr. Rob Hart, we had to hire a small plane off the coast of WA, and we did some microgravity loops. So we had to take a tennis ball, an ultrasound machine, we had to throw the tennis ball up to prove that we had achieved microgravity, and then we would scan our model to show that our protocols were also still relevant in space, because there'd been a lot of work that had been done by the Russians and the Americans, but they had 30 seconds of microgravity when they did the parabolic flights. We had 7 seconds in a small plane. So we had to prove that our protocols worked, and that was the only way we could do it. So it was out of this world, as they would say. It was quite different.
Very well done. Did it make you, that kind of work, make you look at the recent case where the astronauts were meant to be up for 7 days and they ended up for 9 months?
As soon as I saw that story, I thought, oh my God, imagine all the physiological implications of that, because one of the projects we were asked to look at was, could you diagnose a deep vein thrombosis? Because when you go into microgravity, you have this massive fluid shift and all the fluid goes up into your upper body and chest, and you're left with very minimal venous drainage in your leg. As soon as you get minimal shift of vein fluid, then you end up being more prone to a deep vein thrombosis. So I thought, I wonder how they, got around that. They would have done lots of foot rotations and all the things we get told to do when we're on a plane, keep up water and do all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's more complicated than one would think.
Oh, very. It's unbelievable. I mean, space flight is just an incredible impost on the human body, really.
That's incredible. Now, you've used that research and application for something a little bit closer to home, but not that close.
Not that close, yeah. So the Australian Antarctic Division, or the Polar Medicine Unit of the CSIRO, approached us and said, or they already had some affiliations with NASA. Obviously, they all tap into that geographically remote medicine, and they said, would you be happy to look at some protocols that we could use? So we went down to Kingston, which is about 30 kilometres south of Hobart, and at that time we beamed in all of the 4 Antarctic bases, and we had people at all the bases, and we gave like a tuition session or 2 from that base. So that was really good too, and we had some great success, and that was probably more rewarding as an Australian to see our 4 bases, because Australia owns almost half of Antarctic territory, and while we keep it in our possession, I think it's going to be looked after. There's not people down there trying to exploit it. So it was a really rewarding thing.
And when you say successes, what were they?
Well, we did have a couple of instances where people had trauma, and so they were able to use the protocols, send the images back, and the radiologists, both in Perth, and because Perth is closer to Antarctica than other major centres, both in Perth and Melbourne were able to say, the patient or the tradesman or whatever has sustained an abdominal injury, you need to get them out. So there was an episode of a kidney stone. So there were a few things, and they do have an operating theatre down in Antarctica at Casey. So there were opportunities for people to get intervention.
And then you've also been involved in supporting First Nations communities. Can you talk about that work?
Sure. I've done that a few times. So as a sonography educator in Kalgoorlie, I would fly out to the Eastern Desert community, so as far as Warracoona, which is Northern Territory WA border, north as far as Warburton, and we would go and we would either do ultrasounds for the physicians in Kalgoorlie, or I would teach the nurses on site how to use the ultrasound machines for some major diagnoses, because those nurse practitioners out there, they have to be prepared to deal with whatever walks in the door. So there's no, boundaries up about, you shouldn't be doing that, or, this isn't your job. And so whatever they could use on hand would help them deal with the patients. And
travelling you even around the globe, you're also involved in Radiologists Without Borders?
Yeah.
Yes.
So Radiology Across Borders is an Australian initiative, and it started looking after a couple of countries in Southeast Asia, but now it beams to over 93 countries. Those talks that I give, although the webinars or the talks are aimed at anybody in the hospitals in those countries, a lot of the discussion is around how do you use just an ultrasound machine and an X-ray unit, which is what most of those sites have, to again manage a whole lot of patients. And so equally, when I went to Sri Lanka, because there's very minimal CAT scanners, or if there are, there's wait times of 4 to 6 months, an MR, well, I don't even know if there's an MRI scanner in Sri Lanka yet. So it was about how do you use ultrasound to manage patients with a variety of conditions that we just take for granted. We would have a CT, then an MR or a PET scan. You just don't have those resources.
And so would you encourage others to sign up? Absolutely.
I think that it is really putting Australia on the map, not only as imaging experts, because we are on an international scale, but also as people with true philanthropic desire. Like, we are essentially good people who want to help others, and I think the majority of us are like that, and it's a really positive thing.
And perhaps a global view. At the moment, we have to end up in the United States with the new president. Yeah. Have you seen an impact from the quite devastating cuts to US aid?
I haven't yet. because with my Radiology Across Borders work, I'm essentially volunteering for them, and we have things planned a year ahead. So whether we see that we'll get other nations, perhaps from South America or other nations traditionally that were looked after the US, it could well be. The webinars are, however, increasing in appeal, so it could be that there's an increased spread across those nations already. It wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say, Marilyn?
No, I really would just like to say that I think we should have pride in our healthcare workers, and if anybody really gets the opportunity to provide some assistance in their workspace, whatever they do, not imaging but anything, just do it, because it's a really good, it's always good to reap rewards of kindness.
Fantastic, thank you very much.